Hello, my name is Martin Murphy from the ILO Department of Communications. Welcome to another ILO live session on Facebook. Today we're going to be talking about another very interesting topic. It's social protection for all. What does it mean? What does it take to get there? My guest is Isabel Ortiz from the ILO Department of Social Protection, the head of our ILO Department of Social Protection. And Isabel, first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Martin.
It's a very busy time for us. We're live at the International Labour Conference, the 105th International Labour Conference. And before we start with the questions, I just want to remind our readers that we're live on Facebook. And please be sure to send in your questions. You can put them on the comment box, and we'll be sure to read them and answer them. Isabel, first of all, what is social protection, and how is it different, or is it different from Social Security?
Thank you, Martin. It's great to be here with you and all of you here. Well, social protection refers mostly to cash transfers, and we're talking about pensions for older persons, disability benefits, child allowances, maternity benefits, so all that type of cash transfers that are delivered to people across the life cycle. There are also services that can be given, for instance, taking care of children, street children, generally part of social assistance.
Okay, and I know another very important concept for the ILO is the concept of social protection floors. If you could explain to us what the ILO means by social protection floors, and also how are they different, and again, are they different from a safety net?
Very good to put all these concepts here. Look, ILO traditionally, the traditional name used for all these programs was Social Security. Governments, at the end, they have departments of Social Security or agencies of Social Security. But with time, the word social protection appeared to include a variety of other cash transfers, normally non-contributory. And that's how the name social protection became more prevalent since the 1990s. So we use it interchangeably, social security and social protection. Now, this is, however, different from safety nets. Safety nets are only targeted to the poor. So generally, you're talking that there are pensions for older persons, disability benefits, all those tend to be universal. You want in a country that everybody, by the fact of being in old age, will receive a pension. But safety nets are only targeted to the poor, so it's not for all. Then ILO, recognizing the enormous importance to address all members of society and across the life cycle from children to older persons, then approved Recommendation 202. And that was approved by all governments of the world, all employers and all unions in 2012. And the recommendation is a recommendation on how to build social protection floors in countries. And it has been extremely popular, not just at ILO, it has been fully endorsed by the UN and by the G20. It's part of the G20 leaders' declarations, and today many countries are implementing it.
Great. We're going to be talking about Recommendation 202 and more precisely about it a bit later on. Now, let's talk about what's really happening in the world. Are countries developing social protection floors? Are they investing in social protection? If you can tell us a bit about what certain countries are doing.
Yes. It is actually a very good question, because the reality is that a number of developing countries are expanding massively social protection. It's a real explosion of cash transfers. Very important to notice. And let me give you a few examples just coming from the last few years. China has achieved universal pensions in only 4 years. It's phenomenal development. But many other countries are also expanding social protection. To give some examples, Ecuador is now giving pension to housewives. Simply by the fact of being housewives, they're allowed to subscribe to Social Security, and they will receive a pension in the future. Vietnam, for instance, now is paying 2 weeks of paternity leave. And Sweden, 3 months of paternity leave. So different levels of economic levels have different benefits, but the whole world is somehow evolving. More examples, Brazil now has incorporated domestic workers into Social Security. Bolivia in recent years nationalized its privatized pension system and increased actually the pension. Philippines has just signed a health bill for the elderly, and there are many, many examples for many other developing countries and also high-income economies.
Okay, so a lot of examples there of different countries that are investing in social protection. Now, Isabel, what about the so-called austerity measures? Which we've seen some examples, especially since 2008, the financial and economic crisis. How do they fit within the story of social protection and social protection floors?
Well, that's a very interesting question too. What happened is that when the crisis emerged in 2008, actually the whole UN came together and they launched a number of urgent initiatives. One of them was social protection floors. And from 2008 to 2009, actually the amounts developed to social protection increased. So that was positive from a population point of view. And we estimate of all the fiscal stimulus plans that they were done in 50 major economies, about 25% of that was invested in social protection. So these 2 years, first years, 2008, 2009, actually social protection increased. But the problem came in 2010. And you're right. Here, countries started to get more concerns and to prioritize a fiscal stance. And then they started processes of fiscal consolidation, which is a new term for the old term austerity or adjustment. And in that, social protection has been very affected, particularly in high-income economies who have been contracting and doing reforms to pensions and some health reforms and in a number of social sectors. Now, this has happened mostly in high-income countries, but perhaps the less known story is that it's also happening in developing countries. Today, as we're speaking, 132 countries are cutting public expenditures. The majority of them are developing countries. So developing countries are also at the moment implementing austerity measures. They are normally adjustments to the wage bill, that is the salaries of civil servants, which the largest amount of them, they tend to be teachers and health staff, social workers, and civil servants at the local level. So the wage bill of them is generally being cut or capped in a number of countries. A number of other countries are actually targeting the programs. What happens is that that was the program, then instead of covering all this population, it's actually going down level and targeting only the poorest. Mm-hmm. Of course, you have to protect the poorest, but the objective is universality, that it covers all. So that is the risk that we are facing at the moment. And then about 105 countries are reforming their pension systems, so different types of adjustments. Some are small parametric adjustments like reforms to the pension, the retirement age, extending it a bit, and some are more significant reforms which we need to watch out. And then health reforms and labor reforms and others. So this is what you have experienced in the crisis is a kind of contradictory diverging trend. On the one hand, a number of countries, particularly developing countries, expanding social protection madly. It's very interesting to see that we're commenting the cases of China, Ecuador, many. And then another set of countries that actually are contracting because these austerity measures.
Right. Thank you. For those joining us live now, we're doing an ILO live session. Today we're talking about social protection for all. What does it take to get there? My guest is Isabel Ortiz, the head of the ILO Department for Social Protection. Please do send in your questions. We actually have the first one that came in, Isabel, and it's from Maria. And she says, are ideas like universal basic income part of social protection initiatives? What do you think about this?
Very good question, Maria. The trend is to move towards universal social protection. So even in June last year, the World Bank and ILO together stood up, and the president of the World Bank, President Kim, the ILO Director General, stood up and said of the importance to move towards universal social protection coverage. But that means universal pensions for all older persons, maternity benefits for women that are, pregnant and soon to deliver, for children, etc. It's across the life cycles and selectively. The topic of universal basic income, or UBI, that's still not in the development discussion, though there are very interesting experiences. It's being piloted in Finland and in the Netherlands. It's also, it was a referendum 2 days ago here in Switzerland, so it's very relevant, and it was rejected. And generally it gets rejected because of the high cost. Now, we estimate, like in Europe, as an average, if we will set the universal basic income at the relative poverty line of 40% of median income, which is the lowest poverty line of Europe, they will cost about 20% of European GDP as an average, which people tend to think is very high. You have to think that the current cost of social security in all across Europe, it is 20%, but that includes the contributions of people, and meaning of workers and employers. If you remove the contributions of workers and employers, the current cost is only 10%. So social security, which at the moment covers a very significant amount of of people in Europe, is actually half of the price of universal basic income. That is generally the reason why it might not be considered. But it is a very interesting idea that is developing there, and certainly it will help to reduce exploitation overnight.
Great. You said that the overall goal is having universal social protection for all. That's definitely the way that we want to move on. Now, are the benefits of having social protection and social protection for all, are they only limited to the social sphere, or are there other benefits for the economy, for the society as a whole?
Certainly there are many developmental impacts. Now, some people, the most conservative, say that actually social protection is only charity, and this is really not the case. To start with, because it's a human right. But, you read Article 22 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it clearly tells us that everyone as a member of society has the right to social security. So this is what we are doing. We are implementing a human right. But going back to the developmental impacts, they need to be explained many times, because many governments might not be so amicable, so to only listen to human rights, and they want to hear others. We know that there are enormous developmental impacts in terms of human development. Children, for instance, go to a school longer. If they have a child benefit, it's much easier to secure retention of children in the school, so they don't have to work if the family receive a cash transfer. Very clearly, mothers at the time of delivery, is very important if they have a cash transfer, because it allows for better delivery and better nutrition, which is fundamental for the child. And then, so generally, by this type of improvements in nutrition and education, you achieve major gains in productivity when children become adults. But apart from all that, it is actually very important for economic reasons. And this is one of the things that we have been highlighting a lot in ILO publications, because the reality is that the current problem of the recession is limited consumption. So what happens, we're having a deflationary spiral, household income is decreasing, and people are consuming less and less. So to support household income is fundamental. So the levels of national demand and consumption can keep up and ensure that there is sufficient economic demand for products and then economic growth. So social protection plays a very important role in that, as stabilizing household income and ensuring that people can have consume products and not simply demand fall down.
Absolutely. Social protection makes sense not only from the social point of view, but it also makes very good economic sense. We're live here on Facebook, live from the 105th International Labor Conference at the Palais de Nación. Another beautiful day here. My guest is Isabel Ortiz, the head of the ILO Department for Social Protection, and we're talking about social protection for all. What does it take to get there? Isabel, we keep receiving questions from our viewers. This one comes from Manlio. Actually refers to a question that I put to you before, the one on the so-called austerity measures. He says, what are the arguments given to support cuts to social protection programs, and what arguments would you use to counter them?
That's, very good question again, because we do it all the time. Generally, governments is not that they are against social security or social protection. Of course, all governments want to give citizens protection. But what happens is that they have competing priorities, and then they prioritize a fiscal objective. They think that getting their fiscal deficit or their debt under control is much more important, or inflation is much more important than not protecting populations. This is what happens. So then social protection or social security is put in second term. Now, what we need to do is to debate that and say, well, no, it should not be. For the arguments we have been given, is actually, if you do that, ultimately you are going to increase recession because people will not have the capacity to consume. And also, in any way, from a human point of view, a time of recession is not the time to cut social protection. It's the time precisely to expand it, to ensure that everybody has the necessary protection.
Another question, this one coming in from Jurian, I hope I pronounced that correctly. This one says, should social protection be extended through employment or mostly through other channels?
Well, social protection, let's go back. There are cash transfers. Then the way you do the cash transfers, they can be in many manners. The majority of social protection transfers are unconditional. They are given simply because you enter some moment of your life cycle. Let's say again, if you're a pregnant mother, you receive them because you are a pregnant mother. Okay, so it's not an employment. It's not related to employment, though it could be contributory. Then pensions the same. Okay. Now there are some of these cash transfers. They are organized around promoting public employment programs, and then after completion, of a month of work in the public employment program, you receive the cash transfer. It's, let's say, a conditional cash transfer in which you work for that. That is another option, and yes, there are many good examples around the world and applied all over. Yes.
Okay. Another question that I think it's very interesting. It has to do with the fact that some people may think that social protection is only something for rich countries. Is that so, or is it all sorts of countries at different developmental level that can apply it?
No, as we were commenting, definitely not. This applies to any country. Different countries have different type of schemes, though. And of course, what happens is high-income economies have more developed social security traditional schemes, mostly based on contributory systems, because more people have more income, there are more jobs, so people can contribute. In many developing countries, you have a blend of both, contributory and non-contributory, except in some sub-Saharan countries that actually they have purely tax-based systems in which you have universal pensions just based from the tax base. Let's say Namibia, a number of sub-Saharan countries, and these are very important other, developments of social protection. And social protection is affordable really to all countries. It depends on political will and how governments organize, their own capacity to mobilize fiscal space for social protection.
If you're joining us now, we're live on Facebook. We're doing another one of our ILO live sessions. We're talking about social protection for all, how to get there, what does it mean. My guest is Isabel Ortiz, the head of the ILO Social Protection Department. Please continue to send in your questions. You can put them on the comment box. We have another one, Isabel, this one from Maresha, and she says, who is responsible for social protection? Who gets to decide how it gets implemented?
Very good question. Generally, social protection is a state duty. This is why it is in conventions, in recommendations, and it's a human right. And as all human rights, it's the responsibility of the state to implement it. But how this is done in many manners. Normally, the way that we work in ILO is that we organize a national dialogue in which all the important stakeholders are called in. That it will include from employers, workers, and different civil society organizations, and of course government. And everybody then discusses which is the scope of the social protection system, how they want it, or how they want to improve it, because most countries at this stage they have already a social protection system, but how to improve it? That is the big debate. And then, you cost the different options, you formulate different designs and say, we could expand this area or the other. It all gets debated and finally approved. And then finally it gets implemented generally by the government But here the issue of monitoring by civil society is very important, so to ensure that people receive the benefits that they have agreed to.
Okay, you just were saying that the one who gets to implement social protection and social protection measures are governments. Now we're here at the ILO where not only governments but also workers and employers are represented. We're a tripartite organization, and I wanted to ask you a bit if you could drill down a bit more on the specific role that employers and workers play in promoting social protection.
There are multiple roles that they have. For instance, employers. Employers, a big thing that you will like is that they ensure that all the workers employed in their companies actually do have access to social protection. And there are very good examples here of expansion of social protection even in small and medium enterprises or in micro enterprises, which is more difficult. In Latin America, for instance, we have the case of the monotax, and the monotax is a very simplified procedure which has a degree of government subsidy, in which a micro enterprise with maybe only one or two workers, actually they can subscribe to that, then they pay the tax, but on their benefit, then they receive social security benefits, access to health and pensions. So that is very important to see these developments. So that will you want employers to move that way, even it happens in the difficult cases of micro companies, micro enterprises. Then for unions, what you want is also the same, that they, from another side, that they actually ensure that the companies they work in or they are present, that they get access to social security or social protection. The role of all of them is very important in national dialogue when you design the system itself, so you see all the pillars and see where you're going to put more importance or not, what are you going to expand in the context of national development. That is actually the largest generally role that they can play.
Great. Let's talk about a slightly different issue, although it's very much connected to social protection. As you may know, we're getting ready to celebrate the World Day Against Child Labor in a few days. The official day is June 12th, but here at the ILO, we're going to mark it on the 8th. And actually, the next live session that we have later today is on child labor, so please do tune in for that as well. Isabel, what is the role that social protection can play in preventing child labor?
Well, a very important role from any point of view, but let's start by the basics, which is the amount of children and women that die. And the numbers are terrible. We know that about 800 women died every day of childbirth. And about 18,000 children also die daily of different diseases, and different causes. All these deaths are preventable. And they're preventable, of course, if you increase the household income. People die because they don't have access to health, because they might not have the money to pay transport to go to a nearby hospital, because they might not have the capacity to pay a small fee that might be asked in the hospital. So cash transfers can solve the very basics. Of course, food assistance, which is part of social protection, that will solve the immediate cases of hunger, malnutrition, and death. But then also, cash transfers help a lot, for instance, in the case of retaining children in school. And we commented that a bit before. But you see, many children have to work because the reality is that the households are too poor. The families are too poor, and they need the support of the kids. So, with a stipend and with a meal provided in a school, which tends to be quite economic for governments, actually you might secure that these children don't have to work, but actually are able to stay in a school and develop their studies as they should. It's an investment in the future of a country, so it's very important to do it. And now people say, oh, but this is so expensive, and particularly, lower income countries, because they have a huge amount of children. And it's true. Lower income countries, they tend to have really a large amount of children. But we estimate, estimations done in ILO shows that actually is not so large. Look, on average, calculating in 57 developing countries, we estimate that a universal benefit to all children, it will require about 1.9% of national GDP. for maternity is much cheaper because there's much lesser number of women delivering at one point, and it takes less time. So as an average, we're talking between 0.1% to GDP to 1% of GDP. So these numbers are not so extremely large, and they can be afforded by many countries, provided that they explore aggressively sources of fiscal space. But even the IMF recommends that.
Okay, we're live here from the International Labour Conference, the 105th International Labour Conference. If you're just joining us now, we're talking about social protection for all. What does it take? My guest is Isabel Ortiz, the head of the ILO Department on Social Protection. Please keep sending your questions through Facebook. We have another 5 to 7 minutes to go, so we still have time for a few more. This one is coming from Yogesh, and the question says, globally speaking, what are the trends in terms of social protection coverage? Where do you see this trend leading over the next 5 years or so?
Okay, here what is important to notice is that in September last year at the United Nations General Assembly, the Sustainable Development Goals were approved by all world countries, and we have committed unilaterally, all countries, by 2030, developed social protection systems and floors for all, that means for everybody, and achieve as much as possible coverage of the poor. So that means that we expect really by 2030 to have universal social protection systems that will cover all in need. How is progress? It depends on the areas. Clearly, higher income economies are much advanced than lower income economies, but all of them have systems at this stage. Now, the key thing is how much coverage is there. Middle income are advancing very rapidly. It's unbelievable the progress that it is doing. At the beginning of the program, we were commenting how China has achieved universal pensions. This means for all older persons of China in only 4 years. And that has been because of the expansion of the rural pensions. So far the benefit is small, but the important thing is that the progress has been so fast and quick. So that example can be and has been imitated by other countries. Not imitated, they're simply doing it at the same time. Namibia, that we're commenting, also has increased coverage they have a universal old-age pension that covers all older persons in the country. And here, the second fight, which is important, is not just the expansion of the coverage, it's the benefit level to raise it. So Namibia, for instance, has increased it from $32 per month to now $80 per month. And these are phenomenal advances. So for a household, it means that they have doubled the pension benefit. So we are seeing this happening in many, many middle-income countries. And for lower-income countries, and particularly for fragile states, this is more difficult. They generally have safety nets, but these are converting into systems of social protection, and they're moving towards the development of those systems.
Let's talk a little bit about the ILO and how the ILO assists or can assist countries who want to develop their social protection system. If you can talk a little bit about that, and also something we mentioned earlier in the program, Recommendation 202 on social protection floor and the role it plays.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So in ILO, we do a number of things. We work with countries to develop these national dialogues for social protection, and that's why we say you bring all the important players, unions, employers, civil society, and government, and everybody sits around the table and decides how is the system they want to implement, how to achieve universal coverage for all, where you're going to start first or later. And then we assist them, providing them the calculations, so how much will it cost, how estimations on the time frame, how will it take, how long will it take, also advice on how to implement things better. Sometimes there are small improvements that can make real changes to the lives of people. In the administration, instead of having only one thing processing one unit, you could actually have a single window, and so all benefits can be claimed together, and so people can go and claim the things in the same place. So all these type of thing, assistance, technical assistance, ILO provides in multiple countries of the world. Then we also collect the statistics, and here you can download this from our website, this and many other materials, for instance, what we're explaining on China, on Ecuador, many things like that, country cases. There are fantastic number of materials there that I very much encourage you to download. And this is the most comprehensive source of information on social protection. You have all thorough data and statistics and compiling how the social protection systems are around the world, how the different schemes are and all that for perhaps a more specialized audience or those that have more interest to understand more in depth the systems.
Yeah. For those of you, I don't know if you were able to see it, but it's called the World Social Protection Report, and like Isabel was saying, you can download it from the ILO website, actually from the home page of the website. We have time for one more question before we let you go. I know you're very busy here at the International Labour Conference. It's a busy 2 weeks. This one is from Maresha again. She's saying, what can ordinary people do to help achieve the goal of universal social protection?
Well, this is a great question. Help us. Help us to disseminate all the materials. Help us to disseminate the right approach, meaning it must be universal for all persons, as agreed in the SDGs. It's not about little safety nets only for the poor. This is good, of course, but it's insufficient. We aim for more, and we have to be ambitious because this is our generational duty. I want to die and achieve and see that everybody has a pension. And I hope you are with me in that one. There are many other ways apart from dissemination. If there is a national dialogue in your country, participate, engage, provide comments. Go to our website. There are e-discussions, things that you can join, newsletters, help us with all this. And last but not least, if you are wealthy, help us financially, contribute. And it's also a way to ensure that this technical assistance going to the countries, will happen. And we have pledged $50 million that will make a change in the life of 130 million people in only 5 years. So we hope that we manage to get the 50 million.
Right, yes, the ILO, through its technical cooperation programs, can definitely help countries promote social protection, and it's a role that everyone should be involved in, certainly everyone here at the ILO. We're getting to the close of this live session on Facebook. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank you, Isabel, for taking the time to be with us and answering all these very interesting questions. We'll be back in about 4 hours, more or less. We're going to be talking about child labor, and we have two very interesting guests as well. So please do tune in for that, send in your questions, and we'll see each other in a few more hours. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Martin.